Welcome everybody. This is our EdgeDB 3.0 release office hours. This is the first one of these we've done since the release of 3.0. And actually, just before this, yesterday, we launched 3.1. So if you haven't upgraded to that, you might want to check it out. We have a change log posted on our documentation that tells all of the fixes and additions we made there in that new version. Maybe we should start with just a quick round of introductions. I am Devin. I'm the developer advocate here at EdgeDB, which means I'm kind of interfacing with you. If you've been around the Discord for a while, you've probably seen me. And my goal is to make sure that you're successful using EdgeDB and that as we continue to build it out, we are building with that success in mind. You all want to introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Elvis. I'm co-founder and CTO, and I'm here to answer any and all technical, mostly questions, or if you have questions about what's next, I'm also here for that.
Cool.
And I'm Scott. I manage the TypeScript libraries and generators and that sort of thing. And also always kicking around Discord. Been Devin out with anything specific to TypeScript or JavaScript driver, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Thank you both for joining me. And we also wanted to remind you that our cloud beta is running. So if you're interested in trying out EdgeDB Cloud and you haven't signed up yet, you can go to our website, edgedb.com. There is a button at the top of the page you can click to sign up for the wait list. And I think we're welcoming people into that pretty quickly, right, Elvis?
Yep. Yes.
Okay.
Discord takes priority currently. We also have a
Sure.
fairly large backlog of people who have signed up through the website, and we'll start working through that next week.
Yeah. So actually, maybe if you're watching this from Discord, you might want to check out the cloud channel and express your interest in joining the beta there, and you might get in a little bit quicker. All right. We are ready to open the floor up for questions. If anyone has something, feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to come onto the stage and join us via video or audio to ask your questions. Or if you want to just post text questions into the chat, I will monitor those and relay them to our panel of esteemed experts. Thank you. This person says, I really like the EdgeDB idea. It's brilliant work. Thanks for making real this database. All right, and we have a question. I'm going to invite you up to share with us. Hello.
Yes. Hi, everyone. So first, I want to thank Scott Trench because actually he helped me recently with quite a complex query. So thanks. I have two questions. So first question is, I'm coming to EdgeDB from Torsor, which is like an SQLite database, and they basically forked SQLite to add HTTP to it. And they put it on Flyo containers, and the latency of that, I tested it, is like 80 milliseconds from where I am. And that will be pretty much global. So my question is on replication. How doable it is to like put EdgeDB into like maybe a Rust binary and replicate it on Cloudflare workers, or like what are your thoughts on replication? How are you going to achieve it? Yes. So that's and the second question is I might as well just do it. There is a website called pgt.dev that I recently came across, and it's basically a collection of Postgres extensions that basically you can kind of install. And my kind of two thoughts there is it would be super nice to have something like that for EdgeDB, where basically, I don't know what is the compatibility of Postgres extensions for EdgeDB. Does it support all of them or just like a list of them? But it would be really great if you could just like basically have really clear instructions to download essentially all the Postgres ecosystem if you could. Yes, those are my questions. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So what do we have to say about replication first? I guess we can address that maybe.
Yes. So replication, it is mostly about how you implement this in Postgres, because EdgeDB is fundamentally is a front end over Postgres, right? And so all of the options that you have for replication in Postgres are technically available for EdgeDB as well. You can do it even now yourself if you set up replication or something like RDS, multi-region replication, or Aurora multi-region replication, and you can have that from the standpoint of high availability. Now, from the standpoint of reducing latency, where you have a bunch of replicas in different regions all replicating, we do have a plan to implement that in EdgeDB, where your read queries would automatically be routed to the closest read replica that has the required data that you have. Essentially, that's the approach. And because Postgres is fundamentally a single master, single leader node, that's pretty much what we're limited to at this point. There could be some avenues of possibly doing research into possibly using some extensions that enable multi-master replication in Postgres, but that's definitely not for the short term. So the near term plan is to allow you to replicate Postgres in multiple regions. And the second question was.
Yeah, on the question of
Second
extensions.
question was about extensions. That's a very good question, actually, and that's something where we are focusing on now. So EdgeDB is essentially it's an alternative front end with its own query language, its own type system, and so in most cases where a Postgres extension provides some API, that API needs to be expressed in terms of EdgeDB data model, right? So, for example, like the recent pgvector extension that we added to 3.0, which is actually, I think, the first proper third-party Postgres extension that EdgeDB provides. It needs to have a layer of definitions in front of it to work efficiently with, to actually be able for to be used in schemas in EdgeDB. And so our plan for Postgres extensions is to essentially offer them all with like the top level, most popular ones at some point. Yeah. Though it's probably not going to be the case that you can just enable a random Postgres extension and have it work without writing an adapter for EdgeDB. But bottom line is that most of those extensions are going to be available fairly soon in some way or another. So some of those will be shipping built in, like Postgres ships a bunch of extensions built in that you can just enable and work with. But most will be something that you would have to install. And that second part of how you discover and install and acquire extensions to EdgeDB is something that we're working on now. And the idea there is that it would be a lot simpler experience than it is for Postgres. Like you wouldn't have to bother compiling anything or anything like that. Our vision is that you just add that extension as a dependency to your project, to your schema, and and it works automatically. So hopefully that answers your question.
Oh yeah, it did. Thank you.
Right, thanks for your question. I've got a couple in the chat as well. This one I can address. Have you thought about doing a sponsored video with Fireship in a world with EdgeDB? I don't understand how people keep talking about Drizzle connects and those sorts of things. We are sort of ramping up our outreach efforts now. we were kind of waiting for cloud to go into beta just to kind of take down that deployment barrier, make things a little bit easier on people as far as deploying EdgeDB. And so now that that is available in beta and release is out there on the horizon, we are going to start expanding those efforts. So sponsored videos is on the table. You're going to be seeing more blogging from us. We're just going to be increasing our surface area. So hopefully within the next few weeks possibly, or months if not, you'll be hearing a lot more about EdgeDB in a lot more different places than you have up until now. And then Carson asks about our next big push and our next big feature, LSP, FTS. I know that FTS is probably number one on the list. Is there anything else that's super high priority right now that we want to talk about?
Sure, FTS is happening, and it was actually originally slated for 3.0, but we didn't think it was quite ready for 3.0, so we're pushing it to 4.0. So that'll definitely happen. Like I mentioned earlier, there is a lot of exploratory work happening around extensions. And incidentally, language server protocol is also something that's being worked on. We're working on re-implementing our parser in a way that is compatible with LSP, so to enable things like completions, highlighting, and all of that stuff. With respect to when it's not going to be available, it's an ongoing effort, so probably closer to when it's done, we'll let you know if there's a beta or something to try out. But yes, we do want to have a complete language server with like all the features that language servers provide: completions, code formatting, highlighting, refactoring, whatever else comes to mind that should be there.
And this is actually a question from me. Someone was asking about code formatting in Visual Studio Code for, I assume, for EdgeQL, and that will be enabled by the LSP, correct?
Yes.
Potentially. Yeah.
Yeah. So the idea here is that LSP is actually kind of like a standard now. So if you write an IDE, most modern IDEs support LSP, or even like older editors like Vim and Emacs, they have plugins to interface with language servers. So it's kind of it makes complete sense to have a full-featured language server, and then maybe provide thin plugins around it for different IDEs. But it could also be the case that we'll have the CLI as well for things like formatting and maybe linting as well.
Sure.
Of course, that could reuse some of that functionality and be useful in CI or something like that.
Right. Okay. Keen to hear, this is Forest Thunder, keen to hear more about pgvector support. Do you think you might add built-in support for generating embeddings using OSS embedding models such as sentence transformer, or do we see that as something to be done outside of SQL?
So right now, that's something that should be done outside. It's the pgvector extension. Basically, what it gives you a way to store those embeddings and then query them efficiently with like appropriate indexes. So you do essentially similarity search, which is what is needed to kind of drive the actual interaction with the model. Yeah. So that's pretty much how we do it now with our docs. And there's going to be a blog post soon about pgvector, about how we integrated it and GPT in our website and the docs, and how all of that works.
Yes.
Will be a little bit of more exposition there.
Yes. We're working on a blog post and a full guide that will take you through how we integrated ChatGPT. So we're not going to do it for you in the database, but we will tell you how that you can generate your own embeddings and store those. What are EdgeDB's recommendations for storing secure information in the database encrypted, like a user's secret keys?
You, I think, skipped over the previous
Did I?
question.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm
from
sorry.
one.
I did. I really like EdgeDB. I didn't use it on production, but works over Postgres, gives me high guarantees. But out of curiosity, what is the cost? Did we study about the cost on performance, time, and space in the EdgeDB layer over just vanilla Postgres?
Yes, of course. We have benchmarks, both external and internal. The idea for EdgeDB is that it should be as thin of a layer as possible in front of Postgres when you actually run your application, right? So there is a lot of work that EdgeDB does when you define your schema, you make migrations, you apply migrations, and then when you send a query and the first time the server sees it, it gets compiled and verified and all that. But once that's done, EdgeDB actually caches the produced SQL. So whenever you send a query next time, that is the same as you sent previously minus constant in it. It will just reuse the previous query, and the runtime there is basically that of Postgres. So yeah, the idea is that it should be almost not noticeable in for the majority of course, if you see that, hey, this runs very fast in vanilla Postgres, and if I run an equivalent query in EdgeDB and for some reason it takes a lot longer, then it's a bug, and let us know. We'll look into it. But performance is a focus. In one way, where EdgeDB and EdgeQL have an advantage over regular SQL is that you can express a lot more things in EdgeQL that you wouldn't normally do in SQL. So the advantage there is that you can do more in fewer queries, which means that a particular query could be more complex, but it's often the case that even complex queries are fast, but you save on latency to your server, which is to kind of allude to an earlier question about a replication, that in a lot of ways, the lag between your app and the database server is mitigated by not doing a lot of round trips. And we've invested a lot into making sure that both the language and the protocol and the whole design of bindings and everything minimizes those network round trips. So you can often do all the work in a single round trip. So if the latency is like 50 milliseconds, that's the cost you pay, not 50 times 10, like is often the case with ORMs or just regular SQL queries that you have to run in sequence.
Yeah. On the subject of performance against ORMs, there is a blog post with some benchmarks around that might be useful for you to take a look at too. All right. Now let's look at this question. What are our recommendations for storing secure information in the database encrypted?
Same as with any database. From that standpoint, EdgeDB is just like Postgres. There's nothing special. It doesn't do any encryption at rest or anything like that. So if you store user passwords, obviously store them hashed. To use a strong cryptographic hash to store that information. Other than that, there's nothing special.
Here's a follow-up on the vector question. would we add EdgeDB as a vector store within Langchain? It requires a bunch of helper functions to be implemented. Is that something that we have on our radar right now?
I don't think we've considered that, but maybe we have. To be honest, I'm not probably not the correct person to ask this question. But it's certainly something that we can look into if we aren't already.
On our client libraries, it would be a good idea to have a status, feature set, and roadmap table. My impression is that the JavaScript lib is the most complete one, followed by the Python one. Maybe you can address that a little bit, Scott.
Sure. The JavaScript binding, there's kind of two pieces that we talk about when we talk about the JavaScript ecosystem in EdgeDB. One is just the driver being able to make queries over the binary protocol to EdgeDB. That's relatively stable, and all the supported languages are pretty much at parity with each other as far as being able to connect to your EdgeDB database and make queries against it. The other side of that is that almost all of the client libraries have various other features that we've built on top of that. For instance, queries generators where write an EdgeQL query in a file and it'll generate a idiomatic function in your target language. That exists in most of the client libraries as well. And then on top of that, TypeScript also has a fully typed query builder that kind of takes advantage of TypeScript's type system, and not all of the target languages are going to have a type system that's flexible enough to have a really strongly typed query builder. I think our kind of minimum bar for client libraries is obviously having a driver that can speak the protocol and connect, and keeping that up to date. But I'm not aware of any other plans to add any more complicated query builder like projects to the other languages. I don't know if we've any thoughts on that.
Yeah, obviously there's a lot of work to do, and there are a lot of languages, so there are a lot of bindings. I would say that probably the second most featureful binding is probably .NET, because that it also has some bits of query building in it, like with link integration, stuff like that. Though that I don't think that's complete yet, but that seems like it's the closest to get the type safe query building interface. And yes, is to have that type safety in building queries in every binding where possible. Not all languages are very, very conducive to that. So, for example, in like Go, it's tough. It's not a very flexible language, but of course, something like Python, it's doable. So yeah, I think what we do need to do likely is to have a table somewhere with like bindings and features they support or something like that. That'll probably be like a feature matrix type of thing.
I'm going to make a note of that so that I don't forget. That'll be something to look into. Another question, what are our recommendations for logging lots of analytical data? Should they run a trigger on each item creation, removal, update, etc., or send data to ClickHouse?
Depends, I guess, on how much data is there, but EdgeDB, i.e. Postgres, has no problems in storing a lot of data. It's a proper database, so start with storing it in a in a table in EdgeDB and see how that works. And then if you think that, oh, running analytics on this time series or whatnot is kind of slow, I need a proper time series query engine or some OLAP data warehouse type of thing, you can just export to ClickHouse. Yes, and you can, with SQL support in 3.0, you can use external connectors that kind of can move that data for you automatically, so you don't need to do anything special. But if it's a really high volume, then you might want to do it differently. Just send directly to something like ClickHouse, but I wouldn't do that. I would just do the normal thing and then export data to data warehouse if you need to analyze it.
There is a documentation page about SQL support if you want to try that out. It's in the reference section of our documentation. Sakari has posted a couple of links that might be helpful to the people who are interested in performance, the IMD benchmarks we did, and the blog post that compares ORM performance to EdgeDB. So take a look at those if that's something you're interested in. And TD Olson is asking, when can we anticipate the cloud being available in any European region?
Quite soon. So the reason why we aren't going all out in like making every region available, that basically just two reasons. One, and that's more important, is while we're still working through our internal processes on how we do deployments, how all of that stuff gets maintained properly. So the more regions we have, the more overhead we have. And of course, in a small team like ours, every piece matters. But we're working on reducing that overhead. So yeah, and the second reason is obviously overhead cost. Every new region has a non-negligible kind of control plane infrastructure that needs to be brought up. But yes, European, EU, and probably Asia Pacific is the next two things that we're next to regions that will enable soon. Probably just one each.
Carson asks, it sounds like our philosophy as a thin front end over Postgres is kind of the same as what Prisma V1 was doing, which they abandoned. And just wants to know if we can kind of speak to that. Are you all, either of you, familiar with Prisma V1 and why they abandoned that approach, and kind of what we're doing that makes our approach workable?
It's not a thin front end. When I say that we want to be as efficient as possible between you and Postgres, is mostly in terms of performance. I don't want to inject a lot of stuff that happens between your app and bytes on disk, fundamentally, right? Or the actual data. The fundamental difference between EdgeDB and something like Prisma V1 or in V2 is that Prisma is, and probably will be a library, right? That's something that runs, even though they have the Prisma data platform, it's optional, you don't have to use it, right? Which means that if it's a library, it runs on your machine where you run your app. Even if it spawns a process like a proxy or whatever, in the end, it's your app that's making direct connections to Postgres that has fundamental limitations on the number of simultaneous connections you can make, and Postgres is notorious for not allowing a lot of simultaneous connections. EdgeDB is a proper database server, right? And the fact that it runs on top of Postgres is sort of an implementation detail. You don't have to worry about it as an application developer at all. So you talk to EdgeDB the same way you would talk to Postgres. right? So there is a fundamental difference there. We don't run any servers or processes or anything on the client side. The client bindings are fairly simple and straightforward.
Yeah. So I guess it's not really very similar to what we're doing is not really very similar to Prisma V1 is kind of the answer, would you say?
No, it's better to think of EdgeDB not as something like Prisma. It's better to think about it as more about like a fork of Postgres, if you want to think about it that way. The architecturally, the way it runs as a proxy between your app and Postgres, it's just like an architectural decision that we made early on. I guess it makes deployment easier, makes development easier, the whole thing easier, like scaling easier because you're separate concerns. But we could have just as well forked Postgres, and you could have just one piece of thing, and it would a piece of software that would work the same way, appear the same way HTTP appears now.
Is there something we wish Postgres exposed or did that it currently doesn't do or doesn't do well?
It's an interesting question. I mean, of course, there's a big wish list, and you can't have it all.
Is there anything that feels like
Exposed.
low-hanging fruit?
Well, I would say scalability is probably the biggest complaint. It's still quite challenging to scale Postgres horizontally. And there are a lot of things you have to get right to make it work. Of course, horizontal scalability is a massively complex issue. Like even databases that are built from scratch that are this horizontally scalable, something like CockroachDB or something like that, they have a bunch of trade-offs in order to pull that off. So they might appear on the surface to be, oh, it's like CockroachDB is basically Postgres, but it's infinitely scalable. Well, that isn't true, because Cockroach cannot run all the queries that Postgres can with the same level of performance or like at all. Initially for a few years, it used to be the case that the use of indexes was fairly limited there. So there are trade-offs. So of course, like that's one thing. In terms of everything else, well, there are a few. Our complaints about Postgres are mostly on the level of paper cuts. They're not major. Postgres is an amazing piece of software if you get to know it well, if you get to know the philosophy and how it's built. So we've been able to push it a lot further than is possible with pretty much any other database, SQL database engine. Like basically, like most of the like awesomeness of EdgeQL and even the schema and all of that isn't fundamentally enabled by Postgres. A lot of things we do have to emulate. A lot of things are done, the heavy lifting done by the type checker, by the compiler, all of that. But at runtime, the performance you get is basically it's all Postgres.
Just a quick reminder before I go on to the next question. If you want to come up on the stage and tell us your question, join us with video or just with audio, you're welcome to do that. Just raise your hand and I will bring you onto the stage. Text questions are also perfectly fine, and I'll keep going through those in the meantime. The next one is just asking, noting that the full text search feature request is still open and saying that they thought it was available in 3.0. It did not make 3.0, and that is kind of our top priority right now. So you can, I think it's safe to say you can expect it in the next release, which will be fairly soon because we're starting a new release cadence as of the release of 3.0. So I think it should be in October. Is that right? Or is it November? Do you all recall?
Don't
It's
think it's somewhere in October.
okay. It's
Maybe
yeah,
early
it's
November.
okay. It's fairly soon. It should be about 4 months out from the 3.0 release. So look for that then. Oh, Scott's already addressed that in the chat. I love completions of field attributes in the UI available in 4.0, ideally with tab support. Right now there is only history. I think there is field completion, but you have to invoke it with a key press. Maybe it's control space or command space. I'm not sure about that, but I think that is correct. Do either of you happen to know off the top of your head?
There is a fairly rudimentary completion support in the UI,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Though it might not be universally available, it might only be available in like the query editor and not in REPL. But it's also kind of, it's not like full blown completion. It's not like there is no language server. Well, when there is going to be language server, it will be a lot nicer. Right now, it kind of just tries its best.
If
But
there is
yes.
if there's a place that you feel we should have completion and it's not there, or you're not able to figure out how to invoke it, please please just start a new issue, like a feature request issue on the probably on the UI repo, and we'll take a look at that and either make sure it's exposed better, or if it's not there, we will keep it in mind for the future.
Yeah, control space is the
Control space.
keyboard command to try to complete fields if you have a select, for instance, started and you're inside the curly braces.
There we go. There is always an infinite amount of features to add and improvements to make. What is EdgeDB's strategy for prioritizing?
Well, it's a good question. Of course, there's like an infinite field, but there's also things that are more implementable and things that are less implementable, and also things that are ultimately more valuable for more people, overall more developers. Yeah, we tend to prioritize things that would bring more benefit to a lot more users right away than focusing on some hardcore, very specific issue or support of some feature.
Yeah,
That's pretty much how the process works.
I can say for my part, I join a meeting weekly where I come in and share anything that I've picked up from the community, anything that's a problem for people, or missing functionality. And so for me, I guess sort of obviously, the more people that are talking about having a problem or missing a feature, the more urgency I'm going to kind of have around that. So a lot of it's driven by users, and then, like Ellis said, feasibility, those sorts of things. Does EdgeDB have a process for reporting and handling of security-related bugs, vulnerabilities, etc.? By this I mean where to report, how to report, and how it's going to be handled. I feel like this is becoming more and more important to have now that cloud is out.
Yes, absolutely. We need to put together a page documenting this, ideally on docs, and maybe have a link in on our website and text file in the in a repo as well. But for now, if you find anything, either send us an email to security@edgedb.com, or any other private channel might work as well. There's also, I think GitHub also has like private vulnerability reporting, which I think is enabled on our repo, but we haven't really tested it yet. So that could be a better way to handle this as a process. But definitely, yes, that's something that we need to establish properly.
Out of curiosity, caching and stored computeds. This is in the roadmap for the next version. You can already do something like this with the mutation rewrites feature that we launched in 3.0. You can, every time a field is mutated, you can write, or every time an object is mutated, you can write a value to a field. So you can sort of cache a computed value that way. But maybe Elvis, you could speak to the proper cache computed feature.
Yes, you can emulate stored computeds with rewrites, so you avoid computation that way. But that's basically you're manually constructing that dependency between other properties of your object. What stored, i.e. cache computeds in that old roadmap alluded to is something that does it automatically, but or maybe on some sort of time expiration basis. And given that mutation rewrites are a thing, so you can express a lot of things already now, it took a lot of pressure from having something like that. So we still plan to do it. It's just not on the immediate priority list.
In the 3.0 announcement, there was a bit about using the pgvector extension. Oh, I think Scott has already gotten to this. So TD Olson is asking for the pgvector documentation, and we have a link to that in the chat. Are any of you Neovim users? They have an interesting approach and ecosystem of people configuring for multiple LSPs and highlighters, linters, and formatters. Thanks for recent plugin for highlighting, by the way. Looking forward to LSP and any improvements there. I'm actually a Neovim user. I don't know that I have much more to say beyond that, but yes, we're always looking to improve the developer experience from the editor on up.
We have a variety of editors that are being preferred by engineers within the company. So we have Vim users, we have Emacs users, we have obviously VS Code users. So yes, it's there will be support to all major editors in some way, in one way or another, for sure.
Definitely. Will it be possible to convert EdgeQL queries to EdgeDB.js query automatically? I often start writing queries in the REPL, but they're new to the query builder, so it's kind of hard to, or a little bit more difficult to translate from EdgeQL into the query builder.
I don't know. It's probably a question to Scott, but I could imagine a code gen that kind of like we have query code gen, but instead of generating a type signature, it would generate the body as well as a. It's probably doable, not trivial, definitely.
Yeah, there's also a shortcut a little bit here, which is something that we've talked about, improving the ChatGPT integration. That's obviously a not foolproof solution and not really a tool we want to just lean on for doing stuff like that. But that is one very it can be a good starting point for converting from an EdgeQL query to Query Builder, and then kind of working backwards from there. But like ChatGPT as a programming tool in general, it requires you to know a lot about the thing that you're asking in order to understand it, which is a little bit of a chicken and egg problem. But chickens and eggs both exist. Like that's a problem you can kind of work through by being bad at it at first, and then you kind of slowly learn that way. But then as far as like a reverse parser, where you take the query and then kind of generate the query builder for that, that's an interesting idea for sure. There's versioning issues there too. As we release new features in the query builder, we would need to like update that kind of translation layer. I think that is a valuable thing. It's something we've discussed wanting. We want it as much as anyone else here.
For any of you who are not familiar with their new ChatGPT integration, if you go to our documentation now on the navigation bar at the top of the page next to the search option, you'll have an Ask AI button that you can click and you can ask ChatGPT questions about EdgeDB. And people have been using this in ways that we didn't necessarily expect, pasting their entire schemas in there and asking it to do things for them, write queries and that sort of thing. So maybe that's an option, but like Scott said, buyer beware. Might get you pointed in the right direction though, at least. Okay. The blog article coming for pgvector and GPT embedding, will it include how to add context to? Yes, it's basically going to be our entire process of building the integration I just talked about. So if you read that guide, you'll be able to go and apply this to your own documentation if you want, or some other text source that you have. So it should be everything you need. How can the community contribute to the project? That's a great question. I just want to say, before anyone else chimes in, that we have some contributing documentation. There's a guide on contributing both code and documentation to us. So that's in our docs under guides and contributing, I believe. So if you're interested in contributing, check out those 2 pages, one for contributing code, one for contributing documentation, and that will get you started. And we would love to have your contributions. I've merged at least 2 community pull requests over the past week, and I'm sure maybe you all have fielded some as well. Anything else to say about contributing? Maybe any particular guidelines
Yes.
that stand out or anything like that?
Well, I think it's more about also not just about how to contribute specifically, the guidelines of contribution, but like in general what to contribute and how to help. And I think the most valuable thing to do right now would be to just go and use EdgeDB, build with it, find interesting ways of using it, find interesting ways of maybe doing things on the client side, involving like maybe introspection, code generation, integrating EdgeDB with some other systems and libraries and whatnot, and just post your experience, come to us with feedback saying, hey, this works great, this doesn't work very well. Basically, that sort of field experience is what we're very much value and would like to, you to come to us with. And of course, if you have a favorite programming language that we don't yet have a binding for and you would like to try and implement one, that's also a good way of contributing. But beware that EdgeDB bindings are not a simple affair intentionally. There's a lot of value in having a featured proper binding there that isn't just wrapping text into a text protocol or something like that. There's a lot about type safety and being idiomatic to the language and just being a nice interface to the database. But yeah, we would like to have bindings for all languages at some point. So if that's something that you would like to do, that'll be great.
Yeah, bindings are great. That makes it easier for more developers to use us. And Elvis's first example of the field experience and sharing that with us, that's super powerful because we can use that to improve both EdgeDB and the tools around it, and we can also use it to improve our documentation. So there's a lot of good that can come from that. Well, we're going to be wrapping up soon. We'll probably take one more question here, and then we'll call it a day. Thanks everybody for joining us. And our final question, is it possible to do EdgeDB init with already pre-filled values so users don't have to enter anything? Need this for nice setup in open source project. Yeah, so Scott's sharing the non-interactive option that you can use with EdgeDB init. So yes, if you want to kind of explore for all the different command line commands, if you want to explore what's available, you can just add the help option to any of them, and it will give you a list of everything that's supported there. There are also pages in our documentation that describe them, so you can find out about stuff that way too.
Yes,
All right.
I think that you could do something like that as a script or something. It probably makes less sense to have something like completely built in because everyone's requirements are different. So we just need to make sure that we have enough options and knobs for people to put into scripts. So it's like whatever, it could be package JSON script or something, or it could be just a command that's integrated with some framework that your stack is using.
Yeah, use that help, and if you find that you don't have all the options that you need in order to write your script, then please file an issue in the CLI repo, and we'll take a look at that for you. We want to make all that as easy as possible. All right, everyone. I think we'll wrap it here. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. I hope everybody has a nice weekend. Again, EdgeDB 3.1 is out, so check that out. And Cloud Waitlist is ready to receive your registration at our website, edgedb.com, or here on Discord in the Cloud channel. Thanks again, everybody. Thanks, Elvis. Thanks, Scott. And I hope everybody has a great weekend. Bye, everyone.